So, with a nearly hour-long analysis of the trailer behind me, I thought I was done with my coverage, but I've decided to try something new, an addendum of sorts. As expected, you guys left some really insightful observations, thoughts, theories, and just general comments on that video that I had a lot of fun reading through, picking up on many things that still managed to elude me, and I feel like I learnt a lot. So I wanted to round out our trailer discussion with a post-mortem of sorts, diving into your questions and comments, and seeing if we can't get some answers or at least credible theories locked down between the lot of us. Having had a few days now to ruminate on the trailer, rewatch it again a few times, and read your comments has actually proved quite enlightening. And I think this will be fun and hopefully deliver the clearest, most concise look at the trailer's contents we have on the channel between this video and the last one. So that being said, I won't be going over everything again. I'll only be addressing the most recurring points brought up in the discussion, the biggest questions and more, so hopefully this video won't be quite as meaty as the last one. This is designed to be a small supplement to that video, essentially. So without further ado, let's dive into the final part of our discussion on the newest trailer for part 2 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime coming this July. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well when you're done with it to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support from me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well. And as always, I just want to give an enormous shout out and say a huge thank you to everyone supporting me over there on Patreon. It really does mean the world to me, so thank you all very, very much. And yes, just like last time, there will of course be major spoilers for pretty much the entirety, or at least a very big chunk, of the story that will be covered within the second core of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime, so you have been warned ahead of time. Okay, so I want to begin by addressing something quickly, the pronunciation of Yhwach, or is it Yhwach? For as long as I can remember, I've personally called the Quincy King Yhwach, but people didn't really like that, so for the most recent video I tried to pivot to Yhwach as is pronounced in the Japanese sub, but it turns out people didn't really like that either, which did kind of surprise me a bit. For me personally, Yhwach is much easier to say and feels way more natural to say as well, so for the foreseeable future I think I'll be returning to and sticking with that. And that's all I really had to say on that, so let's move on to the actual sticking points of the trailer. Alright, so this point is a big one to begin with, probably the biggest point of debate that I saw in the comments, and what I imagine will be the nexus of this video: when will Core 2 end? Originally, I've given my predictions in the past. In the last video, I was pretty vociferous in my belief that the core would end with chapter 611, and the cliffhanger of Yhwach stabbing the Soul King. To me, it felt like a suitably dire, a suitably grave, but also momentous moment to leave us waiting on. The entirety of the Bleach universe might be about to change forever. However, after reading what you guys had to say, I've been able to have a bit of a rethink, and I want to briefly go over some of the most prominent suggestions that I've seen and give my thoughts, as well as entertain a new possibility that I like a lot, that I don't think I've seen discussed. Firstly, why I no longer believe in 611 so wholeheartedly anymore comes down to the question of whether or not that would leave enough content for 2 whole remaining cores to follow. Finishing Core 2, the halfway point of the 1000 Year Blood War anime, at 611, would mean there's only 75 chapters of the entire story remaining, enough for probably a core and then a tiny little bit afterwards. Initially, I didn't think this would be a problem, as I thought Core 3 in particular might be where they added the majority of new content and new scenes, as it kind of feels to me like it will need it. However, seeing supposedly how much new content there's going to be in Core 2 alone, it seems likely then that the amount of chapters covered might be cut down a bit, in comparison at least to the first part of the anime that we've just had. The cast list, featuring Ganju and the Schutzstaffel, who don't appear until chapters 598 and 599 respectively, does potentially still reinforce 611 as a viable option, but but it also works with another chapter that I'm starting to prefer a little more now as the potential endpoint, and I'll talk about that one in a moment. Not only that, but finishing the core on 611 would mean I most likely wouldn't get one of my absolute biggest requests, a much extended battle between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel, as they'd likely have to cram that in at the end, along with the Ichigo versus Yhwach fight. And going back to my video looking at the biggest changes I wanted to see in the anime, this was number 2 overall, so I will be undeniably a little disappointed if we don't get it at all. So, to look at some of the suggestions I've seen in the comments, starting at the earliest point put forward, the ending of chapter 587 is a popular choice, and to be honest, I can totally understand this option. The chapter itself is a real mix of burgeoning hope and the kind of shocking moment that would work perfectly as a cliffhanger. It juxtaposes Ichigo and his friends reeling from the revelation of Uryu's supposed betrayal, with them picking themselves back up again and defiantly declaring that they will bring Uryu back, before ending with Yhwach barging into the royal palace itself, setting the stage for the next part of the war. I think that would work well as an ending, Yhwach stomping onto the walkway of the palace with Hashwolf and Uryu in tow, a cold look on his face as they obliterate the entrance around them and set the tone for the core to follow. Judging also by the remaining contents of the chapter itself, it's possible as well that this might afford us extra time in Core 3 for an actual fight between Renji, Rukia and Bazz-B, though I'm not getting my hopes up too much about that one. But I do also have my reservations. Where 611 now feels too late, 587 feels too early to me. For starters, there's the cast list again. Now, it's entirely possible that the characters of Leal, Gerard, Nyanzol and Ganju all show up earlier than they do in the source material, even if it's just for a single line or two. I mean, we've already seen Nyanzol is potentially at this supposed Sternritter meeting, although I'll bring that up again in a minute as well. But for example, I could see Ganju watching as Seirete is enveloped in darkness, telling Kukaku that he's preparing to leave. You know, that would work absolutely fine. But I think there's also just too many missing elements here. Finishing at 587 would essentially remove really the kind of second half of the second invasion. As far as I'm concerned, the second half begins after Ichigo's arrival. So after Kenpachi versus Gremi, Ichigo arrives, then you get the second half of the second invasion. So were it to end at 587, you've really only just started that second half. So by removing that entire second half of the invasion from this core, you'd be removing the fights Mayuri versus Giselle, Byakuya versus Pepe, and more, and then by that point I think the third core begins to look too crowded overall. There is also the chance that they slightly restructure things or cut chapters in half in order to have a more fitting ending, as we saw them do a few times during Part 1. For example, the core could end a few chapters later on chapter 598. Yhwach's assault of the royal palace is underway, and by this point we've also had the fights for both Mayuri and Byakuya taken care of. In 598, Ichigo and his friends all come together to blast off to the royal palace, and there's a nice moment where Orihime reflects on how it all feels like old times again, drawing parallels with the Soul Society arc, which again seems like maybe a nice and fitting place to end off an entire segment of the story. As they wonder if they'll be able to bring Uryu back, the scene cuts to Uryu, and that's where we end. It doesn't really make any sense to carry on past that point in the same core, to keep going into the Senjumaru versus Nyanzol fight at that point, as you're really opening the floor then for the continuation of the Zero Division and Schutzstaffel battle, and it just doesn't feel like a natural endpoint. But again, this leaves us with the issue that certain actors wouldn't be getting any lines unless they show up earlier, as mentioned before. So as we round out this section of the video, I want to leave you with one last suggestion, which is currently my favourite. What if the core ends on chapter 600 exactly? As the Schutzstaffel are introduced and seemingly decimate Senjumaru, the Zero Division spring their trap. The Quincy's are locked within Hikifune's cage, and the episode ends with the dramatic arrival of Oetsu, who draws his sword and tells the enemy to prepare for battle. I feel like that's a great cliffhanger, plus it allows for all of the cast members to be accounted for, and then, after leaving everyone hanging for months as almost a cherry on top, you get to open Core 3 with, you guessed it, an extended battle between the two sides. Yes, it does mean we would have to wait for Ichigo versus Yhwach, but I think then it would mean it would be less rushed overall. And I think we're going to have big enough tentpole fights in this core anyway, to the point where we can afford to push it. Don't forget, this core is going to have Rukia versus Asnot, Kenpachi versus Gremi, and a highly speculated chance of getting Ichigo versus Uryu. All three of those battles would be momentous milestone moments. Anyway, so 600 then is my current pick for the end point of the core, but I think any of the given suggestions are totally plausible. Let me know what you think in the comments. Up next, I just want to touch briefly on the topic of Ichigo's swirling, colourful Reiatsu. I theorised in my analysis that the individual colours were reflective of the different spiritual races of Bleach as follows: red for Shinigami, blue for Quincy, green potentially for either just Hollow or for a mixture of Hollow and Fullbring, and if that were the case, a possible gold for Human. Though I did say I wasn't sure if Human would really even count or not. And it's an interesting one, as Ichigo's humanity is a crucial part of who he is, and it's a part of what makes him special, but I agree with the discussion that it probably isn't being showcased here. The vast majority of comments unanimously think that the colours actually link up as follows: gold for Shinigami, blue for Quincy, red for Hollow, and green for Fullbring. And this does make total sense. I somehow forgot that Ichigo's Reiatsu is now accurately portrayed as gold in accordance with the source material, particularly evident in his Getsuga Tensho, so it makes sense for that to represent Shinigami. Green for Fullbring makes sense too, with Bringer, Light, and Fullbring energy in general often being depicted as green, and I don't really know why my mind immediately went to red for Shinigami, as red has been used a lot in regards to Hollows. It's the default colour for Sero, after all. And well, blue as Quincy is nice and easy. Meanwhile, the debate about the red sky rages on in the comments, so I wanted to give my final thoughts on it here and now. I don't mind the red sky. From an artistic standpoint, I actually quite like it. It makes this battle look completely unique in comparison to any other fight in Bleach, while also giving it a really sinister atmosphere. It's like the battlefield is soaked in blood and the Shinigami are trapped within the Tempest. My only point of contention with it is that I hope it doesn't look totally flat and featureless all the time, especially as the source material actively shows that the veil was, I guess, translucent at points, showing clouds and even the moon. Plus, the sun rises over Sternritter at the start of the second day to the point where brilliant rays of light are able to clearly penetrate the veil, so it can't just be this block colour all the time. That, and I do think you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit. The Quincy are meant to come from a shadow world, yet their sky is supposedly red, but then it also wasn't red when we first saw Silburn, so I'm not entirely sure where that comes from, but I get it. You know, black might make it too difficult to see certain things, it might not contrast as well perhaps, and it might draw too many comparisons to Waco Mundo. A few comments even likened the sky's mixing of black and deep red to Yhwach's cloak, which I actually think is really cool, and if intentional, great imagery. I also wanted to address a couple of points people had regarding the cast list too. Several people pointed out that Hyorin has a voice actor in this core, but the reason I didn't mention that is because that's already known, I would have thought. During his battle with Kangdu, Hitsugaya openly speaks to his Zanpakuto upon restoring his Bankai, and Hyorin not only replies to him, but even shows himself to Kang in a moment of defiance before they defeat the Sternritter together. So to see him on the list wasn't a big surprise to me. An interesting omission, however, that I didn't bring up is Gwenael Lee, the fake Sternritter V. He doesn't appear on the cast list, despite almost certainly appearing during this point of the story. So, what's going on there? Well, I wonder if they might try and give him the same voice actor as Gremi, perhaps, to really emphasise he's just his creation and nothing more. That might mean that Gwenael sounds really weird with a voice that doesn't perhaps fit his look, but to be honest, I wouldn't be all that surprised when you consider how odd his design is in general. It's also possible that they're going to cut Gwenaël entirely to save time and dive right into Gremmy just appearing behind Yachiru and Isane. I'd be kind of surprised if they did that, and I can't remember if maybe they've shown Gwenaël in some concept art or something like that I'm completely blanking on. I would be kind of surprised if they did that, but they might do. Also, a few people in conjunction with this mentioned that Shaz Domino's voice actor is also not appearing on the cast list, but as far as I'm concerned, that just tells me they're probably not going to include any of the supplementary material regarding his character whatsoever. Another small point to quickly bring up is the wolfish smile towards the end of the trailer. I went back and forth a bit in my analysis, believing it could be Zaraki, save for the pretty conspicuous lack of a scar and the overall questionable lighting. While I did bring up the possibility of it being human Komamura considering the very canine-esque teeth, I didn't think a vicious grin like this really fit him, so ended up going with Zaraki, perhaps in Muken. However, as many of you have rightly pointed out, this is almost certainly human Komamura, as his white fur is visible just by the base of his ear. And honestly, I am very happy about this, as this is likely, I would imagine, a new scene for Seijin. Considering the darkness he seems to be in here, I wonder if this is a tease of his new appearance after he transforms in his grandfather's cave. It could also just be a close-up of his mouth as he's transforming back into a wolf, perhaps, as there were a few shots similar to that, but from differing angles in the source material. But regardless, it does seem to be Komamura, and as a fan of his, I am happy with that. Interestingly, this means that Zaraki doesn't appear at all in this trailer. They're really keeping that entire fight totally under wraps, along with a few others. Another small point to bring up refers to none other than Hisagi. During what looks to be an extension of his short battle with Masked Masculine, we see him swinging his Zanpakuto around. A few people pointed out, however, that his chains, at least from the perspective of this shot, look to be almost embedded in the ground, leading some people to think, of course, that maybe he's going to use his Bankai. If Shinji can, then why not Hisagi? Sure, it would mean they'd have to remove the joke at the end of the arc about him not using Bankai, but I don't think people would really mind that trade. What's weird about this, though, is if you look closely, it looks like, to me at least, that Hisagi is holding both of his weapons in one hand and actually is just spinning his chain with the other. So it could be something to do with his Bankai, certainly, or it could just be a slightly flashier way of wrapping his chain around Mask's leg. Either way, this is new, and I'm very intrigued by it. If they are going out of their way to reveal both Can't Fear Your Own World exclusive Bankai, then it once again calls into question, I think, if they're planning on adapting the novels or not. Another thing I wanted to touch on briefly was the reveal that the Sternritter would be coming together for a villainous meeting in the same fashion as the Espada's iconic table meet. This was one of the shots in the trailer that I was absolutely the most excited for, but a few people in the comments of my analysis pointed out that this shot, as well as the shot of Hashwolf specifically, may just be a part of the new opening. I hadn't considered this at all, and admittedly it makes me sad to think about, as it's definitely a possibility. The lighting certainly is weird off the bat, in that it looks too normal. However, the fact that the other Sternritter communal scenes we see in the trailer also have the same lighting makes me think that after all this time, it's maybe only Yhwach's throne room that's soaked in that eerie crystalline blue glow. This would also mean this shot of Uryu isn't in his own quarters as I originally suspected, but still in Yhwach's presence. So that means it's possibly perhaps just after he's finished drinking the Quincy King's blood. Regarding this particular setup, this particular shot being just for the opening, however, I'm unsure for a few reasons outside of simply wanting it to be the case. Firstly, it seems odd to me that they would create this just for the opening when there's no corresponding scene in the story at all, and not really even a precedent for it either. Now, I know that openings don't necessarily represent every story beat accurately or even at all, but this feels like it would be a particularly big and egregious one to tease and then never have. Especially when you look at the majority of the first opening for the 1,000-Year Blood War, and the majority of what takes place in that opening does at least correspond somewhat to actual events that take place during the chapters. The Espada's table meeting appeared in opening 7, but that's because it had already been established as being a thing by that point. In fact, it was a major part of their iconography as a villainous organisation. Not only that, but if we assume that the new opening will use colour in a similar way to the first one, then there's no sign of that sort of artistic direction anywhere in these shots. Personally, I'm still hoping to see this brought to life as an actual scene in the anime itself, as the Sternritter unfortunately never came together like this in a grand way in the source material outside of the special chapter cover of chapter 640, but I guess we'll have to just wait and see on that front. Either way, if it is happening, it's probably going to happen very early in the new core. And finally, I just want to address that shot of the bright white lab. Many of you were kind enough to provide translations for the red warning screens. They basically just say connection lost, which to me would definitely imply that this is during the switchover scene where Sternritter is replaced by the Vandenreich, as I initially theorised. It's just a little odd that this is definitely the interior of Mayuri's secret room where he's modified it to remove all shadows, complete with an apparently ready-made platform to eventually ascend to the palace and everything. In fact, in chapter 589, we learn that Mayuri built a replica of Kukaku's flower crane cannon here on this very podium in the centre, according to Kisuke, way back when the Zero Division first descended. So I wonder where it is now. Maybe it's somehow hiding in the base of the podium itself? And then later in the source material, we see Kisuke putting the finishing touches to this podium in chapter 612, completing or maybe rebuilding, rethreading the rope fence atop it in order to then begin the process of creating a gate to help them travel to the palace. So maybe they just got ahead of the curve here considerably somehow. I really don't know. But that's it for the video, guys. Like I said, it would be quite a bit shorter than that one. It's just meant to be a sort of addition to that last video, to the analysis of the trailer that we did. And I think this pretty much covers it for my coverage of the brand new trailer. But let me know what you think of my theories, predictions, all the points I made in this video, basically. I'd love to hear, once again, your comments down below. And again, the discussion on that last analysis video was just fantastic. Really helped enlighten me in many ways to some of the things I missed or got wrong about the last trailer. So yeah, thank you for that. And really, it was just a great showcase of the community coming together. And hopefully we've been able to glean just about everything from this trailer. That's it from me though, guys. Once again, I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. And until next time, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.